Greetings and welcome to episode 24 of the Department of Tangents podcast. I couldn't ask for a better interview subject for this particular podcast than Joe DeRosa. Not only is he a very funny comedian, he's also a full-on horror fan, something I found out when I read one of his short stories on the Fangoria website. I asked him to do the podcast to talk about comedy and horror, thus covering 2 out of 3 of the main subjects of this blog and podcast. And we talked about both consecutively and concurrently, about comedy audiences and finding his voice, and his overstuffed horror DVD collection, and about the particular kinds of horror he enjoys. But we also got the full trifecta when he spoke briefly about his love for hip-hop and how that played into his stand-up start. We spoke in the green room of Laugh Boston before DeRosa's show here, and you can hear the first 2 acts, Dan Crone and Kyle Plouffe, doing their sets faintly in the background. DeRosa spoke until just a couple minutes before he was up, and I appreciate that he could go straight from the interview to stand-up mode in such a short time. Stick around at the end for an advanced look at the upcoming self-titled EP from melodic punk band Date Night with Brian, which is out April 21st. And now, enjoy Joe DeRosa. So last night Dan was telling me, a crowd of 44 massage
artists, massage therapists.
Massage therapists, yeah, that's a better way to...
They didn't... You're not supposed to call them... I don't know, man. You're not... Masseuse is the bad word to them, I think. Uh-huh. Massage therapist is the good word. Because I said masseuse, and they groaned. Because that means a prostitute, I guess. One that'll jerk you off or something. But as I told them last night, they're, the legit, their prices are too high. It's $75 or $100 for a massage, and I'm like, there are women that do it for $40, and then also give out hand jobs.
And they did not take that very well.
I'm fucking around with them, but they thought it was funny. I guess people could take a joke about their profession.
Do you get a lot of that sort of thing in comedy clubs where you've got a convention in town and there are, the first 6 rows are all the same occupation?
Not frequently. It happens sometimes if the club is inside of a hotel like this one is. Uh-huh. There used to be a club called Rascals in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they were inside of a Hilton. Uh-huh. So once in a while, when you were doing Rascals, you'd get a convention. One time it was actually really cool. There was a horror movie convention there. Uh-huh. So like Robert Englund was there.
Oh, nice.
I don't think he came. If he did, I don't know. I don't think he came to any of my shows. But somebody told me that another year when that convention was there, he did go to a show. So, but I did meet some horror icons because they came to the comedy show that I was already a fan of. So that was pretty weird.
Did you see them in the crowd while you were performing? Was it?
I met them afterwards. So one was Michael Berryman, who was he's in the original Hills Have Eyes, and he's in Weird Science. He's in a lot of stuff. I think he eventually did comedy too. And then after a show one night, these women came up to me, and it was the 2 women from the original Evil Dead movie, and then the woman that played Alice in Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. So I was a huge fan of all those movies. So that was pretty cool.
Did you get to cater to a horror audience at all? Did you have?
No, because I didn't even know they were there. I mean, I knew the convention was happening, but I didn't know anybody horror related was in the audience. This was a long time ago, Uh-huh. So I guess I just assumed that at that point in my career, I couldn't imagine two paths crossing. I thought the comedy people must be in the comedy club and the horror people must be out there. Uh-huh. So no, I didn't do anything special, but they were still fun and really nice. They seemed to have fun.
Have you found those 2 audiences do have a crossover, the comedy and the horror audiences?
Well, now I do because I co-host a horror podcast called "We'll See You in Hell" with Patrick Walsh, and so now I meet a lot of people that like both, and and prior to the podcast, I think I was becoming aware that just in general, not just with horror, but because of guys like Brian Posehn, with his interest in heavy metal, and the same with Florentine and Don Jameson, and then also being part of the show Can I Kick It with Al Jackson and Tone Bell. That's a hip hop centric comedy show. I just was starting to realize like you can actually explore your interests through comedy. So that's been great. So now I get to do that with horror music and rap music, or horror movies and rap music, which are probably my two favorite things in the world. Outside of stand-up. So,
did you not realize you could talk about your interests in your comedy? Was that not sort of an essential?
When I started, it was all. When I started out, it was pretty. At least the way it was presented to me, it was all pretty separate at that point. There were. The nerd thing was not mainstream at all. That had not become like a cool thing yet. The scenes were very segregated. It was a mainstream. It was called the mainstream club scene, and then there was they were like the what they would refer to as like the ethnic rooms. Like, well, that's a black room, and that's a Puerto Rican room, and that's because that was the demographic that made up the most of the audience and who was performing on stage. And then there was the alt rooms, which was sort of like where the nerdier people went, and that's where it was all very separated though. So it was like you did this kind of comedy in a black room, you did this kind of comedy at a comedy club that was part of the mainstream, you did this kind of comedy for the Puerto Rican audience, you did this kind of comedy in an alt room, and there were these sort of broad stroke concepts of what each one of those comics was. And I was somebody who started in a black comedy club that was, that was also a mainstream comedy club. So it was, my idea of comedy was pretty, I don't want to say narrow. It was just like I just kind of had one understanding of how comedy worked, and certainly at that point in my career I did not have an idea of how to in any way talk about things like esoteric horror movies and make them funny. I still don't really. I talk about a lot of stuff on my podcast that I would never talk about on stage because I do this selfishly for myself, and there is that selfless aspect where you do it for the audience too, and even though that's a little smaller than my purposes for getting up there, my personal interest for getting up there, I do like to keep in mind that if they don't know what I'm talking about, it's stupid. There's no point, So I don't know how many people want to hear. If I had a way to make a routine about the movie Creepshow very funny, sure, I would do it. But a lot of the time, people are going to be like, "Oh, I never saw the movie." Okay, I guess I know what you're talking about.
Well, when you started, then were people saying things on stage at the club you were going to go, you were going to start at? Were they saying things that resonated with you? Was that part of what made you want to?
Well, yeah, because I loved rap music. And I still do. So I was in a black club. So a lot like that was like if you did rap jokes, you could do them at a black show. So that's kind of what I'm saying with this idea of segregated comedy, not necessarily racially segregated, just topically segregated. But it was like if you want to talk about comic books, you need to go, down the street to the coffee house where the kids in the tortoiseshell glasses are hanging out. Because that's where you do comic book jokes, and of course, obviously, comics in every scene did jokes about everything. I'm not saying you never heard a rap joke in an alt room, and you never heard a comic book joke in a mainstream room, and you never, and all this stuff. Of course, you did, but they were usually broader versions of those things. If you were in an alt room and you heard a rap joke, it was usually about a very, very, very popular rap song, but whereas the club I started in, I remember one of the guys that was around when I started, he would do an impression of Run from Run DMC, and it was like, and I know they're really famous, but the nuances and everything, it was like if you weren't a hip hop fan, you weren't going to quite get it, and if you were going to think it was like the funniest thing on planet Earth. So it was just, those were the differences, you know.
Well, how long did it take you? Well, we can use the new album as an example. There are a lot of personal things that you talk about on the new album, and including, you know, your view of mortality and depression and therapy.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get to a point where you were talking about those kinds of things?
That took a while. My own shortcomings weren't that hard of a thing to get to, because I think that's where most comedians start. You know, the general idea when you first start is, I'm such a loser. Here's why. You know, it's usually that met with, you know, observations. Have you seen this commercial? Where, you know, and but the heavier stuff, you know, it was that took a while. And when I first started to try to talk about depression and sadness and things like that, it did not work at all, at all. And when I first started doing those, the stuff that eventually became the material about death and the special, you know, that was definitely an uphill battle. But by that point, I knew that I could figure it out. Whereas when I first just started experimenting with that subject matter, I didn't know how to figure it out.
Well, just that line, "You can just die," is sort of startlingly funny. Which, I don't know, to audiences, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to the routine first before you listen to this. But it's just, I don't think anybody ever thinks of it necessarily in terms quite that stark.
Yeah.
That's what makes the joke work. It's sort of...
That's a line that came out of a lot of pain. You know, I have had a lot of friends and family members die very suddenly over the last, you know, under a decade. You know, lost a lot of people in under a 10-year stretch. And, you know, that's just what I started to realize. I was like, you can just die. You know, like, you get into your mid-30s, and that's, I think, when most people start losing people for the first time. If you're lucky, you won't lose that many people. Unfortunately, in my family particularly, we lost a lot of people. So it was a very, very harsh awakening. And I just realized there's no real rhyme or reason to any of this, you know. And I started to really become, because then that grew into an almost crippling phobia of death that I had to deal with and work on so I could live my life.
Well, how did it get to a point where you could talk about it on stage at a comedy show?
Therapy, honestly. A lot of therapy and Prozac, you know, which I talk about. I'm on Prozac in the special. And, you know, it's just, you know, cathartic, you know, the cathartic process of life and whatever else, you know, just learning how to come to terms with things and not obsess over them. But I was getting to a place where I was obsessing, and that's why I had to do something about it, because I was like, I'm going to be in trouble if I don't get past this. I'm not going to be able to live a normal life if I don't get past this. So I did, thankfully. It still scares the shit out of me, but, you know, I can deal with it, you know.
Well, does that routine make you laugh when you...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's very funny. I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was funny. Yeah, I think it's funny. And I think, like, it's probably so far, the most proud I've ever been of a piece of material to somehow, you know, jovially talk about anxiety, depression, and death, and have people laughing. And then particularly with the anxiety stuff, people come up to me, did come up to me. I don't really do that stuff anymore since we shot it, but people would come up to me pretty frequently, more than any other piece of material I've ever had, and say, like, hey man, I really relate to that. Like, I have anxiety. Thank you for talking about that. You know, it made me laugh. And so that's really nice to know. I never thought in any way I could ever help anybody, you know, so, and I know that that's a very minor way to help somebody, but it's nice to know that it helps somebody feel good for a couple minutes.
So there was no forethought that mentioning this, taking away the stigma, could help anybody. It was just a comedy routine.
Yeah, no, I say this all the time. The second you start to think your work is important, you're fucked.
Right.
So I don't ever think anything's important. I believe in what I do, and I'm a proponent of it, but I don't, I don't ever sit there and go, this is important.
Uh-huh.
You can tell the comics that do, and you don't want to listen to them.
Well, the other thing, having that crippling fear of death, how did that work out for you as a horror fan? Did you have to stop watching?
No, it never. Those people ask me that a lot. Those two things never had any connection. I can't explain why. Horror to me is utter fantasy. It's an escape. I prefer supernatural horror.
Mm-hmm.
Even the horror movies I like that are about the slashers or murderers are the immortal Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees types. I really don't like anything that depicts real people doing horrible real things to other real people.
So like the torture porn stuff.
Yeah, I'm not into that. I really do love the film Hostel, but to me it's because it's got a triumph to it if you've seen it. And I also think it's got a really brilliant social commentary to it, to show a group of kids that are buying, in the skin game essentially by going to Amsterdam and buying women to have sex with them. And then they get roped up into being bought in a very different way where people are buying them to torture them and kill them. And then the main character getting his revenge and the bad guys getting their comeuppance. There's a lot more to it than just torture porn.
Right.
But, there are a lot of really, really well done films out there that I don't enjoy because they just remind me of bad news. Things that I'd see at 6 o'clock and get depressed. So I don't want to, and that's, I don't even know if that's because I'm scared to die. It's just not fun for me to watch, So they're two very separate things. Horror to me is it's a great escape. It's just completely ridiculous, and I love it.
Well, I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre again for the first time really since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, and that's one that is, sort of built on a lot of shocks and a lot of transgressive.
Yeah.
And I
do like that film, so I guess that's a contradiction in my thing.
But that one was...
But he's almost like it's weird, I don't know, he's almost like a monster, and the fact that this crazy family is operating in this town untouched is very odd. And then the second one gets really cartoonish, and it's a satire, and I find those movies very interesting.
Yeah, they're completely different movies, one and two.
Yeah.
But one, I almost thought, after having seen all of the Saw stuff and all of this torture porn stuff that came through, I expected to watch that and think, oh, this is going to seem kind of quaint.
No, it's intense.
Yeah, I watched it at 2 a.m. when everything was quiet in the house, and I love scary movies. I'm not often scared by them. I don't know if you have that same sort of thing where it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't get scared very easily. Sometimes a movie will get me.
Yeah,
a little creeped out, but
that creeped me out. That got me.
It's a creepy movie. I saw a film critic say once that the fact that it looks like a documentary is why it's so frightening, and I think that is true.
Yeah.
It all feels very real. You don't think those people are actors when you're watching it. You're like,
right. Have you driven through towns that remind you of that?
I lived in Texas, and I did drive west from Austin into New Mexico and Arizona and everything. So I don't know, I guess I passed through some areas that are kind of like that, but I wasn't scared. I don't think it's out there. It actually looks more like The Hills Have Eyes out in that part of the Texas, because it's very desert and
It just occurred to me as a touring comedian and a horror fan that you could have some sort of frightening moments driving out alone between shows somewhere.
With
nothing but your thoughts and
I've done a lot of tours where I've had to drive myself from show to show. I've stayed in some real creepy places, but it's never scared me. It's always been very like romantic for some reason, you know. So no, I'm not scared of that shit. Yeah.
Is it hard to find like-minded people to go see horror movies with? I mean, I know personally, it's if I don't know somebody's into horror, it's a strange thing to say, hey, do you want to go see this movie with me where people beat each other with their own limbs? It's a great time.
Surprisingly, I see most horror movies on dates. I seem to, I guess like minds, you know, find one another. I you know, a lot of dates. I seem to date girls that like horror movies. Oh, that's, and not like in a, they want to cover their face and scream kind of, like they're into it. So you know, that's how I see a lot of them. That I own a ton. I mean, I have a really large collection. So, you know, I watch a lot too when I'm just kind of flying solo at home and stuff. But no, it's not hard.
And it's been really, you said, I think you said in one interview, it's somewhat recent that you've sort of dived into this. In maybe the past 6 or 7 years,
I was always a fan, but yeah, I made a conscious decision to expand my horror collection. Probably 7 years ago or something. Just because I was like, wait a minute, I love these movies. Why don't I buy more of them? And I was like, oh yeah, I can. And then, you know, you end up in the rabbit hole in the upstairs room at Amoeba Records, or you know, or on the Amazon website, or you know, or some store you find on the road, and you just, that's it. I had to. It's funny, Pat, my podcast partner, he said this to me recently, and then right after he said it to me, I did it too. But he was like, I had to put a cap on my DVD purchases. He goes, I'm so backed up with the stuff I haven't watched. He's like, I'm not allowing myself to buy anymore. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was thinking, that's crazy. What are you talking about? And then like 2 days later, I was like, I bought a bunch, and I was like, oh, I have nowhere to put these. All right, that's it. I got to watch everything I haven't watched yet and figure out what's going to go where.
I feel like that's a common thing.
Yeah. So yeah, it's almost like a light hoarding, but the thing you're hoarding has a purpose.
Well, because so many of these things are not terribly easy to find. I try to support physical media as much as I can for these things. So there are things that are available to me in some places streaming that I try not to watch because I want to pick it up.
Yeah, there's certain stuff you want to experience in a certain way. You know, I buy VHS, I buy DVD, I buy Blu-ray, I buy vinyl, I buy CDs, I buy cassette tapes. I do digital stuff, I stream stuff. You know, it all depends on what. There are just certain things I want to experience in a very specific way. You know, so I'm fine playing. You know, the app version of Sonic the Hedgehog on my iPhone. I can live with that,
right.
But I can't live with not owning a Super Nintendo that I can physically put, you know, the Gradius 3 cartridge into.
Did you have to blow the back to
the guy to get it?
Yeah.
I had to blow a guy to get it.
No.
They're hard to come by. No, that was the regular Nintendo. The Super Nintendo, you don't have to do that. So you know, it's just like it's just certain things I need as a mediophile. You need them in a certain way. I can't explain it.
Do you read a lot of horror fiction?
I read a good amount. It's usually what I do read. When I read, I do read it because I write horror fiction. So I had a column with Fangoria for a while called Some Severe Situations, and you know, so when I read, I usually read fiction or the news, and when I read fiction, it's usually horror fiction.
Are you drawn to different things in horror fiction than you would be in movies and TV?
No. No, I just like what I like. I like ghost stories, you know, that's just the kind of stuff I like. So anything supernatural and odd. I always want to see a monster versus the whole it was in their mind. The monster was guilt,
Right.
whatever. Like, that's fine. It's just not what I prefer,
Mhm.
So I like to see stuff because it's fun, man. It's fake. It's crazy. It's fun,
Is it more modern fiction than you like, as opposed to Shirley Jackson or Edgar Allan Poe? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've read some of that stuff, but I definitely more modern stuff. My favorite, Richard Matheson is probably my favorite fiction author.
Mhm.
I really like him a lot, and I really like his short stories a lot,
Mhm.
and I really like his approach a lot. And he was probably the biggest influence on me with my writing out of anybody I could think of, because I'm a massive, massive Twilight Zone fan, and I like a lot of his work. And I just think he just writes exactly what I want.
Mm.
He's like, here's 5 pages, story, point A to point B. It's kind of creepy.
I got that sense from Something in the Water.
Yeah.
The sort of Twilight Zone kind of
Yeah. Thank you.
twist to it. That's the only one I could find, though, of your fiction.
They're kind of tough. I don't know why it's so tough to find. If you Google my name plus Some Severe Situations, they'll pop up.
Mm-hmm.
But the website didn't. You couldn't link to the next story. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. I'm trying to sell it as a book now, so we'll see what happens.
Do you submit to anthologies and things?
No. This was a new experience for me this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been writing these for a few years, but it was a new experience for me having a home for them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we left when the podcast left Fangoria, it was at the same time that our producer and editor left. Our producer and my editor left the company. So I just decided, oh well, I've got more than enough here to make a proposal. I'll just try to sell this. So we'll see what happens and then I probably will submit them. I want to get them out there somewhere.
Was there a bit of a tip of the hat to Creepshow in Something in the Water?
Yes.
In that, okay.
Creepshow is my favorite. My favorite horror franchise of all time is Creepshow.
I loved that as a kid.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah. Creepshow 1, Creepshow 2, and Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, are to me a perfect horror trilogy. They're all Savini, Romero, King.
Right. Well, was it specifically the Stephen King section of Creepshow that was it?
Yeah, the Legend of Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite. That's my favorite story out of all the Creepshow stories of any of the movies. I mean, I like stuff, which is why the column was called Some Severe Situations. I like stories about people with their back against the wall. And I like to, because I'm a stand-up comic, I like to write from the perspective of one person, and it's just the way I'm able to do it. I don't know, it's how it's what comes to me. So it's easier for me to understand the horror and the story, seeing it through the eyes of somebody as they go through it, and trying to figure out, well, how would this person react to this, and who is this person, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that was a big one. But I also, I'm a big Tales from the Dark Side TV show fan, and there's an episode called The Odds with Danny Aiello and Tom, the guy from, he's in Easy Money, and he's in Heat, and he's in House of the Devil. He's a character actor. I'm blanking on his name right now. Very famous character actor. But it's just the two of them, basically, for the entire episode. In fact, I met Danny Aiello once, and I told him that The Odds was my favorite episode of Tales from the Dark Side, and he started quoting it to me, which was exciting. Yeah, because it was only like 2 years ago. I mean, that thing was from 1984 or something. So that was exciting.
Well, you always wonder if that was just a job he showed up for one day and left.
I know.
No one remembers. And
to my surprise, because I kind of thought maybe that's what he would say. And to my surprise, just because I like not a lot of people look at horror the way they look at everything else, unfortunately, and I think that's wrong. So I just kind of assumed like he'll probably just be like, "Oh yeah, that was fun. There was a lot of laughs," and he was like, "I love that part. I got so into that part." Like we talked about it for a few minutes. It was cool. But my favorite episode of TV ever is Cutting Cards, which is an episode of Tales from the Crypt. And again, it's two guys. It's Lance Henriksen, and I'm again blanking on the other actor's name. And they're two gambling rivals that go against one another. I like stuff like that. I like one mano y mano, like two people stuck in a crazy circumstance that they can't get out of because of either themselves or the surrounding situation, or, you know, again, the idea of one person back against the wall, like the Stephen King story in Creepshow, the one he acts in. I mean, I just like stuff like that. That's a big influence for me. And obviously, again, it's all ties into stand up.
It's all in what way does it tie?
It's just you up there. So it's you. It's your journey.
I was going to say,
if you can take the audience with you on your journey, then you succeed. And if you can't, then you fail.
The more simple, the better, because you've got to keep that tension going in both horror and comedy. Yeah.
I just always liked that kind of stuff. I was always a big fan of one-act plays or plays. I know a one-act play doesn't have to be one person, but usually a one-act play is a much more simplified story. I just like stuff like that. I'm a big David Mamet fan, and his plays are multiple acts, but it's, 4 characters, 3 characters, 2 characters. I just like that kind of storytelling. So I probably should have tried to be a playwright.
It's not too late.
No, it is. I think the theater's officially dead. I don't know.
Well,
I don't
make
know.
a zombie theater.
Yeah. I'll see. That's the way to make money these days, is try to become a playwright. Well, the Hamilton guy's doing well, so maybe there is hope.
Well, you just got to do a historical horror.
Yeah, a groundbreaking musical that Rosie O'Donnell and Oprah really like, and then you're in.
Well, you could make it a rap musical as well. That covers your interest. You could put everything you love in one place.
I don't know if you've heard Hamilton. I've heard excerpts from the soundtrack. The guy is smart in a way that I am not. So I think anything historical is out of the question for me.
Well, getting back to do you like horror that has a comic element to it?
Yeah. Sometimes, if it's done right, I think I like it. Tales from the Crypt always had a sort of wink to the camera, which I always liked. The same with the comics, and I read a lot of those. Jordan Peele's movie Get Out supposedly has some comedy to it.
Hopefully, I'm seeing that tomorrow.
I'm trying to see it tomorrow as well. And it looks intense. So I like that stuff. And then there are other things that are just more directly comedies that have horror elements. Like I really like This Is the End a lot. I thought that was really funny, and I thought that did generally have some real tension to it. But that's a tricky balance.
Well, because usually they get one or the other right, but not both.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I got to go on stage.
All right. Well, thanks for
Thank
talking
you.
to me.
How much do we got a half hour, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Well, anything else?
Yeah, 31 minutes.
Anything else you want to mention before?
Just go buy the album, the special. It's on iTunes. You Let Me Down. Leave a nice review if you like it. And check out the podcast. We'll see you in hell.
Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Joe DeRosa for taking the time to talk, and to Laugh Boston for allowing me to invade their green room for an hour. DeRosa's new special is called You Let Me Down, and you can find out more about him and that at joederosacomedy.com. JoeDerosa comedy.com. And now, as promised, an advanced track from the upcoming Date Night with Brian EP. Date Night with Brian is a punk trio from Seattle consisting of 2 guitarists and a drummer, and they are adamant about the no bass thing. This is a really short track called Summertime, which opens the new 5-song EP. It's incredibly hooky and happy-making, and you can find out more about the band at datenightwithbrian.com, and that's Brian with an I. The self-titled EP is out April 21st. Enjoy Summertime.